This is the fourth lecture in our fall faculty lecture series on the university, presented by the Committee on Public Lectures. The growing size of our major state universities has been forced by the increasing realization of the importance of and the demand for higher education by larger and larger numbers of people. Is the increase in size necessarily a bad thing for the quality of an undergraduate education? Certainly since the turn of the century, the state colleges and universities which receive most of the increased student population have grown immensely in academic stature and resources and scholarly reputation during this time. Has this growth in eminence been more than offset by the impersonality of a multiversity? That more than simply an increase in size has characterized the growth of institutions of higher learning in the U.S. is illustrated by the following amusing quotation, which I'm sorry, I feel I have to take time from the lecture to tell you, from an article entitled "The Future of the Liberal Arts College" by David Ross, Dean of the Faculty at Bethany College, reprinted in a recent Phi Beta Kappa publication. The public has always looked up to its image of the teacher, and still does, but the image has changed. Some time ago, the ideal teacher was strolling across an ivied campus, greeting students by name and gathering about him a cluster of admiring adolescents whose questions about world affairs, literary criticism, and sex he answered with wry maxims drawn from Plato and Shakespeare. This man had his habitat in the small liberal arts college. Today, however, the image of the ideal teacher finds him standing in a laboratory, surrounded by 3 middle-aged graduate students and $20 million worth of equipment, and answering their questions with references to Fermi and Teller. This image requires the setting of a large university. To discuss, end of the quote, to discuss the question, is a first-rate education possible in a multiversity, is Dr. Franklin P. Rolfe, Dean of the College of Letters and Science and Professor of English. Dean Rolfe has in the past been Chairman of the UCLA Department of English, Vice Chairman of the Academic Senate, Dean of the Division of Humanities, and is also currently Vice President of the Western College Association, which accredits junior and senior colleges in California and Hawaii. His research specialty is Victorian literature, and he has taught popular courses in the English novel and the Victorian age, among others. Dean Rolfe is the best man on campus to discuss tonight's question for a number of reasons. As Dean of the College of Letters and Science, he comes into contact with both the problems of students and with the growth and development of departments. But the change from the semester to the quarter system, which will begin next fall, has provided Dean Rolfe with the opportunity to think about and to lead our campus into a number of reforms concerning the curriculum and its administration, which we have every reason to hope will help to make a UCLA undergraduate education second to none for an increasing number of students. It is my pleasure to present Dean Rolfe.
Professor Sadden, ladies and gentlemen, when I was first asked the question, is a first-rate education possible in a multiversity, and may I say that the question was bestowed upon me by the organizers of this series of lectures, not chosen by me, my immediate answer was yes. Of course, I had understood it to mean, can a student get a first-rate education at UCLA? And if I didn't believe so, obviously I should resign. But the more I thought about it, the more argumentative booby traps I found concealed in that simple sentence. In the first place, it implies that I accept the idea of the multiversity as defined by the inventor of the term, President Kerrs, in his provocative book, The Uses of the University, and that I accept the term as applicable to UCLA. Second, I must say what education means to me. And what does first-rate education mean? Is it first-rate education of the first rate, that is, the most brilliant students, or a first-rate education for all students, including those who are dismissed a couple of times before they eventually struggle through to the AB? Finally, may I take advantage of the word possible, or must I discuss probability as well as possibility? Saddled thus with all the difficulties of my assigned topic, I can only give you the view from within me. I suspect that many of my colleagues would look out upon a different view. And I think I should warn you that you may be depressed by my lack of sophistication. I am a simple-minded man anyway, and I believe that the purpose of a little talk like this is to simplify and clarify the issues, not to complicate and obscure them. So much for caveats. Now then, what is the basic purpose of all education? In the broadest terms, I believe it is to teach the individual to come to terms with himself and with the world. I might have said to adapt to his environment, but the word adapt seems to me to imply too strong a suggestion that the individual should do all of the adapting, and that I do not mean. Rather, I mean to imply that the individual should learn how to negotiate a truce with life, or rather a series of truces, since the conditions constantly change throughout a man's life. Old truces are broken, and negotiations are frequently reopened. The individual's great problem is to learn how to achieve and maintain as much control as possible over his situation. And first of all, he must learn how to control himself, his body, his emotions, his intellect, his will. I do not propose to enter into any involved psychological and philosophical discussions of these terms. I accept them pragmatically and empirically as identifiable components of the self. At the same time that the individual is learning how to control himself, he is trying to learn how to deal with other individuals and with the whole social order. So far, I have been describing what seems to me the whole process of education, from the cradle to the grave. But our specific concern is what portion of this process is the function of the university, or the multiversity, and is it performing that function? Personally, I do not think it is one of the basic functions of the university to teach the student how to control his body and his emotions. Of course, we do teach physical education and philosophy, but I am talking of basic purposes. It seems to me that the basic concern of the university in its teaching function is to train the intellect of each student from the time he graduates from high school through even his postdoctoral study. And inevitably, this involves the training of the student's own will to be so trained. I've been looking at the educational process from the student's point of view. Suppose now we shift to the point of view of society toward the specific educational institution in question. How does society judge that institution's success? For this question, there is a very precise answer. Institutions of higher education in the United States are accredited by 6 regional accrediting associations, which are composed of representatives of institutions already accredited. In other words, each institution is judged by a jury of its peers. These 6 associations are joined together in a national federation which attempts to keep the individual association's practices reasonably uniform, though not unreasonably uniform. Moreover, these 6 accrediting associations, as well as all other accrediting agencies in the country, specialized ones like medical and legal education, are themselves accredited by a national commission on accrediting. This is a unique and thoroughly American method of controlling a national system of higher education. It's the precise opposite of that system in many countries where there is a minister of education who gets up some morning and decides that all the schools will do this or that. In other words, higher education in America controls and manages itself, and if any legal bodies interfere too much in the affairs of an institution, even a state institution, that institution may lose its accreditation. This is a potent threat, which has recently been used effectively in a state which shall be nameless. It is not California. Well, this is an interesting subject which I cannot go into further, but the point I want to make is this. All 6 regional accrediting associations and the National Commission on Accrediting, and through them the whole system of higher education in America, agree on one fundamental principle, that each institution must be judged in terms of its type and its purposes. As a result of the application of this principle, accredited institutions in California range all the way from the vast University of California to a tiny college like San Luis Rey, which is training some 70 young men to proceed to a theological seminary and eventually to the priesthood. The types and purposes of higher education in America are many and varied, and any individual institution can be fairly judged only in the context of its type and purpose. Which brings us to the multiversity. Just what kind of an institution is it, and how does it differ from a university? The multiversity was first described and analyzed, as we all know, by Kerrs in 1963 in his Harvard lectures on the uses of the university, a book which has been too often misquoted and misrepresented, deliberately misquoted and maliciously misrepresented to many who have not taken the trouble to read it. The impression has been given that Kerrs thought he was constructing a utopia, whereas he had no such intention, as should be clear to any reader. He was simply trying to analyze and comment upon an existing reality. The modern American university as it has historically developed and is developing. Moreover, he expressed a good deal of concern, even alarm, about this development. It should be emphasized that President Kerrs was discussing all large American universities. He was not talking about multiple campuses, and he cites the University of California only as the institution where the multiversity has been most completely developed in all its ramifications. You have probably already noted that I have been using the terms university and multiversity as synonyms, and I shall continue to do so, because every American university of any consequence is a multiversity. The multiversity is simply the American university as it has developed in the second half of the 20th century. What then has it become, in the opinion of President Kerrs? After sketching briefly the history of universities to show the sources of the various elements of the multiversity, he proceeds to describe it. Out of all these fragments, experiments, and conflicts, a kind of unlikely consensus has been reached. Undergraduate life seeks to follow the British, who have done the best with it, and an historical line that goes back to Plato. The humanists often find their sympathies here. Graduate life and research follow the Germans, who once did best with them, and an historical line that goes back to Pythagoras. The scientists lend their support to all this. The lesser professions, lesser than law and medicine, and the service activities follow the American pattern, since the Americans have been best at them, and an historical line that goes back to the sophists. The social scientists are most likely to be sympathetic. The resulting combination does not seem plausible, but it has given America a remarkably effective educational institution. Again, the multiversity is an inconsistent institution. It is not one community, but several. The community of the undergraduate and the community of the graduate. The community of the humanist, the community of the social scientist, and the community of the scientist. The communities of the professional schools. The community of all the non-academic personnel. The community of the administrators. Its edges are fuzzy. It reaches out to alumni, legislators, farmers, businessmen, who are all related to one or more of these internal communities. As an institution, it looks far into the past and far into the future, and is often at odds with the present. It serves society almost slavishly, a society it also criticizes, sometimes unmercifully. Devoted to equality of opportunity, it is itself a class society. A community, like the medieval communities of masters and students, should have common interests. In the multiversity, they are quite varied, often conflicting. A community should have a soul, a single animating principle. The multiversity has several, some of them quite good, although there is much debate on which souls really deserve salvation. That's the end of the quotation. President Kerr goes on to analyze this community of communities still further. It is, he says, a complex entity with greatly fractionized power, the competitors for power being the students, the faculty, public authority, and the administration. Among these, he feels, coexistence is more likely than unity. All of this leaves Kerr rather uneasy and apprehensive. He feels that the institution should have a soul, should have a single animating principle, should be an organism, should have unity. Instead of any of these, he sees in the multiversity only an uneasy balance of power and interests, which is not enough, which cannot be a permanent state. Frankly, I do not share his apprehension. I hope the President will forgive me if I say I think some of his pessimism arises from two sources: a yearning for managerial neatness, on the one hand, and a touch of that romantic nostalgia which blurs much criticism of modern education. That nostalgia which has been a concomitant of civilization since the days of the Greeks. That looking back to a golden age when all was well, to a simpler life when the complex problems of modern life did not exist. I would be amused by the thought that the longer man exists, the more golden ages he has to look back to. Golden ages which themselves complained that the good old days were gone and that they were overwhelmed by the complex problems of modern life. I would be amused, I say, if I did not deplore the consequences of such looking backward, especially its consequences for education. As we know, the new education of the Renaissance had to fight its way slowly against ingrained prejudice. And all through the 19th century, Oxford fought a rearguard action to preserve Renaissance education against the incursions of modern science and the modern languages and literatures, including English. One of its champions, Matthew Arnold, a school inspector and an authority on education, deplored the founding of Cornell University and Johns Hopkins because they admitted science departments on the same basis as the humanities. And he defended the backwardness of Oxford in a famous paragraph. Oxford, he wrote, the Oxford of the past has many faults, and she has paid heavily for them in defeat, in isolation, in want of hold upon the modern world. Yet we in Oxford, brought up amidst the beauty and sweetness of that beautiful place, have not failed to seize one truth, the truth that beauty and sweetness are essential characters of a complete human perfection. When I insist on this, I am all in the faith and tradition of Oxford. I say boldly that this our sentiment for beauty and sweetness, our sentiment against hideousness and rawness, has been at the bottom of our attachment to so many beaten causes, of our opposition to so many triumphant movements. And the sentiment is true, and has never been wholly defeated, and has shown its power even in its defeat. We have not won our political battles, we have not carried our main points, we have not stopped our adversaries' advance, we have not marched victoriously with the modern world, but we have told silently upon the mind of the country. We have prepared currents of feeling which sap our adversary's position when it seems gained. We have kept up our own communications with the future. Well, this is sweet prose, and there is much truth in it. But the sad consequence of such an uncompromising attitude was that Oxford abrogated its leadership of British education for decades, and had in the end to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the mainstream of modern education. What that paragraph really means is we can't stop the world, but we can throw monkey wrenches into its machinery. With such an approach to education, I have little sympathy. I do not mean to say that President Kerr makes any such statement, but I think there is somewhere in the back of his mind the feeling that it would be a happy circumstance if the progress of the multiversity could be slowed, if not halted for a while. And I do not share that feeling. I firmly believe, rather, that the history of education teaches us that institutions of higher learning should reflect the conditions of the society in which they currently exist. And this brings us back to the question, is the varying system of balances of interests in the multiversity, the balance of teaching, research, and public service, the balance of the various disciplines, the balance of the interests of the students, the faculty, the administration, and the public, a permanently viable system of our organization? And is it in harmony with the conditions of American society? There is no doubt in my mind that the answer is yes to both questions. Certainly a system of varying balances is, and always has been, the American way of life. We are accustomed to the balance of the executive, legislative, and judicial powers in the federal government, the balance of city, county, state, and federal governments, the balance of church and state, the balance of the two-party system. We have the constantly shifting balance of the interests of 50 states, the peoples of which have maintained their individuality to a remarkable degree. Consider how different are the views of life of the citizens of even adjacent states, such as Vermont and New York, or Nevada and Utah. It seems to me that the capsule history of the United States is that we differ when we can and unify when we must. And I think this is an equally good summary of the organization of the multiversity, certainly of the University of California. I like it, and I think the university can live with it indefinitely and with profit. And personally, I think that the multiversity, reflecting as it does the very structure of American society, is the best place for the individual to learn how to come to grips with that society. So much for the description of the type of institution which the multiversity is. We are still left with that other fundamental question: what is the basic purpose of this type of institution? Speaking in broadest terms, there are, I think, two principal approaches to the education of the individual: the teaching of him to live with himself and his fellows. One is to take the individual carefully along a narrow path from which few trails branch off. Under this system, many of his problems are solved in advance because they are not allowed to exist. He has a minimum number of choices to make. Outside the structure of formal education, society offers the individual many such narrow paths through the prison, the asylum, the army, the nunnery, the Communist Party, the Ku Klux Klan, and so on. The range of possibilities is as broad as life. If the individual has any choice at all about entering one of these paths, it is largely the initial one. Thereafter, the way before him is relatively clear. By analogy, there are similar narrow paths available to the student within the framework of formal education beyond the high school. Here again, the range is enormous. All sorts of trade schools, art schools, technical colleges, and institutes, and so on. There are even liberal arts colleges with a single major, like Claremont Men's College. And here again, the student's choices are limited, perhaps to the single decision to enter the institution. The second approach to education is the exact opposite of this first one, and this, I think, is the way of the multiversity. Here there is no straight and narrow path, but a multiplicity of trails, some old and faint, some fresh, joining, separating, crisscrossing, leading off in all directions over the horizon. I do not mean to imply that one of these two approaches to education is better than the other. but merely to stress the very great difference between the two in method and intent. Parenthetically, of course, I should note that on the undergraduate level, a compromise between the two exists in the American college, where the range of subjects is limited compared to the university, but the choice among subjects is free. Clearly, then, the purpose of the university, so far as teaching is concerned, and I am, of course, ignoring the university's other purposes in research and public service, the purpose of the university is to provide the student with the opportunity to study in the greatest possible depth the greatest number of academic disciplines. It is the purpose of the university to open to the student the greatest possible number of intellectual doors and to close none of them. Of course, then, a first-rate education of its kind is possible in a multiversity. The facilities are there. If any multiversity is failing, it is failing not because it is a multiversity, but because it is a poor multiversity. If any student is failing, it is at least likely that he is failing because the type of education which he is getting in the multiversity is the wrong type for him. And so we come to the final question: how probable is it that any individual student will get a first-rate education in a multiversity, or even in any one multiversity like UCLA? Obviously, this is a very difficult question, which I have been avoiding as long as possible, and I am not sure that I can answer it, but I would like to make a few concluding observations. In my opinion, one of the wisest remarks that I have ever heard about education is this: you can't teach anybody anything. You can only make it easier for him to learn. This statement clearly implies the responsibility of the faculty and administration, and also the responsibility of the students. Is the multiversity meeting its responsibility in this regard? Is it doing everything it can to facilitate the progress of each individual student? Frankly, I think this is one of our biggest problems at present. As the university gets bigger and bigger, the problem increases in magnitude. But I do not think the problem cannot be solved. Many attempts to find solutions are now going on all campuses of this university and at other universities. Here at UCLA, in planning the shift to the quarter calendar, we are taking many steps to simplify and rationalize the curriculum and the rules which govern it. And individual faculty members are redesigning their courses to give more attention to the needs of individual students. But these attempts must continue and accelerate. So long as any student's progress is being hampered by faculty indifference, by vagueness of requirements, by unnecessary academic red tape, or any useless frustration, so long he has the right to complain, and complain bitterly. There is no doubt in my mind that some of the present student unrest is due to the university's failure to alleviate its growing pains, and this it must strive to do more and more. On the other hand, the student has a responsibility, too, to make the most of the great and expensive privilege which his fellow citizens have granted to him. And I think there are three attitudes of mind, symbolized by three catchwords now current in student folklore, which are preventing him from getting a first-rate education. These words, and I base this upon experience with many students, these words are tension, motivation, and alienation. Students today are fond of complaining that they are under tension from which they should be relieved. And frequently, I think they do not distinguish between normal and bearable tension and tension which is supernormal and unbearable. I am not referring to those sad cases of unbearable tensions from non-academic sources, of which, alas, there are too many. But too many students, having picked up the catchword somewhere, seem to think that they should be comfortable, should never be under tension at all. And if they persist in this opinion, they will never obtain a first-rate education in the multiversity. Because if there is any course in the university which does not put its students under tension, it should be dropped from the curriculum. The expanding mind must be under tension. There are, however, students who are truly under unbearable academic tension because they cannot cope with the freedom of choice characteristic of the multiversity. They should seek one of the narrower paths of education without delay. The students with whom I have least sympathy are those who complain that they are not motivated. These are the really relaxed minds, slack, flabby, and unbuttoned. No teacher has a right to be dull, granted, but neither has a student. These students, I think, should ponder the dictum of Chesterton, that there is no such thing in the world as an uninteresting subject. There are only uninterested people. If they reject it, nothing first-rate can be expected from them. Alienation, too, is a popular term these days. It is, of course, nothing new. It is only a modern way of stating the old problem of the relation of the individual to society. What is new is that being alienated is the thing to be. If you're not out, you're not in. How this attitude insulates the individual from education is obvious. Alienation has long been a theme in American literature. O'Neill's Harry Ape yearned to belong. Hemingway's hero of To Have and Have Not died meditating bitterly that a man alone ain't got no four-letter word chance. The hero of Steinbeck's best and most neglected novel, In Dubious Battle, explained that he became a labor organizer, a dangerous and unrewarding occupation in the 30s, because it gave him the satisfaction of identifying with a group. But all of these men hated their alienation and longed to escape from it. Our contemporary heroes cherish their alienation and are proud of it. Alienation is a tragic fact. When it becomes a fashion and a cult, tragedy becomes farce. We are only reminded of the famous proud remark of the fond mother, "They're all out of step but Willie." Luckily, the students in these three groups are in a small minority, but they constitute a number of failures for which the university, I think, is not responsible. I would not, however, end on this negative note. In conclusion, I wish to bring this discussion back to a higher and more significant level of consideration. In my opinion, the most trenchant remark in President Kerrs' book, and the one which best summarizes the greatest and most pervasive problem in higher education today, especially in the multiversity, is a quotation from President Kennedy's message on education, given on January 29, 1963. The question raised by President Kennedy is, how can we best secure aristocracy of achievement arising out of democracy of opportunity? The nation, and especially the state of California, have decreed that we shall provide democracy of opportunity. The chief duty now of the multiversity in all its parts, students, faculty, administration, and the public, is to find the way to ensure that out of the educational process shall come aristocracy of achievement. It is an exciting challenge and a great purpose. Thank you.
You made the statement that one of the purposes of education was to, of the multiversity, is to make education easier for the student. How does a class of 1,700 do this?
I don't know, because we don't have such classes here.
Well, your sister campus does.
Well, my sister campus will have to answer that question for itself. I think this is a problem. I should say that it ought to be answered by breaking up the class. I don't think it does make it easier for students to learn. Yes?
How do you propose to change your beginning economics and beginning philosophy and all these classes that are required in the lower division under this new quota system?
Well, there are various possibilities. One is to remain of the opinion that there are certain subjects that are best taught with large lecture sections, which are then broken up into discussion groups. Another device that has been suggested is to have certain smaller sections for honors students. Some departments are providing special honors sections for students. That is easier, of course, in mathematics and the sciences than it is in the social sciences. In the sciences, of course, you can choose these students rather easily by an examination. In the social sciences, I admit this is very difficult. Yeah. But there certainly will be every attempt to provide different kinds of courses. I think you're perhaps implying that small courses are necessarily better. This I don't think is always true. The most exciting course that I ever took had 750 students in it. That was because of the man who was doing the talking. Small classes can be extremely dull. There's nothing, I suppose, duller than a very large class with a dull lecturer. But I can assure you from experience as a student that I would say also the dullest class I ever took had 5 students in it. That, of course, meant there were 4 who were dull in it, not 5. Yes. Well, yes, I can answer that question, though not, I regret to say, so much in the social sciences. But we are trying an experiment in the sciences. In the past, a student has been required to take a certain number of courses in the sciences, quite unrelated, with no attempt to relate them at all. We're now going to require courses in sequence. The requirement will be a course in modern physics, which is prerequisite to a course in modern chemistry. These will be prerequisite to a staff in the physical and life sciences are much interested in this experiment because they can go on in sequence. At the present time, frequently a course at the beginning has to start give the courses in sequence. These will go much farther and be much more satisfactory, and we hope will give the students in the humanities and social sciences something of a real overview of modern science. It'll make more meaning. This has not been done in the social sciences. Yes?
Since we're deviating from some aspects of your talk,
Are you referring to advising for him, or?
No. This is possibly the person, the embryonic stage of the secondary educational system, the person who possibly needs the most encouragement, not so much the counseling, but to bring something into being, the rapport between the faculty and the student.
Well, the reason I hesitate is that we are now in the process of replanning courses. I don't know everything that is going on, but presumably the individual faculty members are attempting to replan and restructure their courses toward this end. There might be various ways of doing it. For example, the unit value of courses. Actually, we're not going to have any unit value any longer. They will all be the same unit value. But heretofore, the unit value of a course has been equated with the number of hours it meets actually in the classroom during a week. This will no longer be true. It's hoped that the individual instructors will schedule more individual conferences. We'll have more reading periods which put the responsibility upon the student to work by himself and then report back. Various devices of this sort which are being tried out now, but as I say, they're still in process of planning, and the results will not be apparent until next year. I don't quite agree with you. I think that advising is not important. One of the great difficulties that we have found in the College of Letters and Science is to deal with the student who is undecided about his major. It, of course, is simple. If a student states a major, he can be sent to his department to be advised in his department. But we have increasing numbers every semester of students who want to remain undecided. This year we're trying an experiment. I have hired 3 advanced graduate students, one in zoology, one in English, one in history, who are advising these undecided majors. All of them were invited to come in if they wished during the summer when these advisors were available for leisurely advising, but the advisors are available all through the year. If the student simply chooses a general field, like the sciences or the social sciences or the humanities, he then goes to the advisor who can tell him what the possibilities are for choosing majors throughout the university and even perhaps looking ahead to possible graduate study. This system of advising, I think, is now working very well, and we hope to expand it.
Could you perhaps summarize what you believe are the major advantages of our conversion to the quarter system?
I think undoubtedly the greatest advantage is that it's shaking things up. Without the shift to the quarter system, I'm sure a good many people would have gone on doing what they've been doing for a long time. But the faculty and the administration both have taken this as an opportunity to do a very great deal of reorganizing. As I said, we've been attempting to get rid of some of this red tape in which students have been entangled for so long. Just for an example, the College of Letters and Science has always had what is called the Letters and Science List of Courses. This attempts to distinguish the sheep from the goats among the courses. It was a kind of College of Letters and Science brand of snobbery. It was felt that there were certain courses from which students ought to be protected. This was a very great difficulty, caused all sorts of trouble, frequently kept students from graduating because they didn't hear about the Letters and Science list of courses until it was too late. Students had to have a certain number of upper division courses which were on the list. They could not have more than 12 units of courses which were off the list. And so you were forever checking these. The list changed every year, and in order to check the record, you had to go back and see when the course was taken and whether it was on the list or off the list at that particular time. Well, this is an example of an old reel of red tape which we inherited from Berkeley, and which I think is a good idea to get rid of. The college has abolished this. From now on, a student may take any course in the university for which he has the prerequisites and the elective time. Also, students now, if they have the qualifications, may be permitted to take graduate courses for undergraduate credit. This is a very special privilege, of course, not awarded to everyone. The graduate division and the college are also considering the possibility of a joint bachelor's and master's degree, which would give the student more freedom to proceed. These will not be simultaneous degrees at the end of 4 years, as is done in some majors, I believe, at Yale. That seems to us to be going a little too far. But this plan is now under consideration. The student would get his bachelor's degree and his master's together at the end of a 5th year, using courses for, not using the same course, of course, for both degrees. These are some of the things that we have been doing. We've also simplified the curriculum vastly by deciding that all students would, that all courses would be of uniform unit value. This means that we can put up the requirements in terms of advantage to the student. Another advantage that has come out of it, I think the students will feel this a good deal, is that each course is designed to occupy 1/4 of the student's time. A student, therefore, will take only 4 courses. At the present time, many students are taking 6 or 7, which seems to me pretty idiotic. This will be an advantage. Also, however, we require only 45 courses for graduation. If you multiply 4 by 12, you will see that if a student took 4 courses every quarter, he would accumulate 48 courses, so that he has a leeway of 3 courses. This will enable him to take subject A without loss, or flunk a course or 2, or accelerate his program, or take more electives, and so on. I think this is an element of flexibility that will prove very important to students. These, I think, are some of the principal things that are happening. Yes?
What's the attitude and potential in these early morning TV college courses?
Well, you mean for the regularly enrolled student? I see them of some advantage for a kind of extension program. I don't quite see the use of them for regularly enrolled students.
And they be used to add to courses of a regularly enrolled student.
Well, I think we have plenty of courses on the campus. Some people think we have too many. I don't quite see the need of adding these to the ones that are regularly given. I don't know whether that answers your question.
How would the quota system work according to time? And then when is how many weeks
It's around, I should know the answer to that, 10 weeks, I believe. It runs from late September to Christmas, then takes up again in January, runs through to March, then begins in April, goes through to June. Yes?
Under the quarter system, we're really an overall attempt to reduce the number of midterm exam examinations in the
Well, yes, I think so. Undoubtedly, the shortness of the quarter, and to some extent, will take care of that. But also, there will be no more midterm grades. There isn't time for it. Yes?
It seems to be very difficult to cover certain areas of material in a quarter. For instance, you taught Victorian novel. How would you teach something like that in a quarter?
Well, this is one of the things that we have tried to do in replanning the program. It seemed to us that one of the greatest deficiencies in the quarter calendar was the shortness of the quarter. And some institutions, which have almost abandoned the idea of the year course as we know it now, have disliked the quarter system, I think, more than any others. Therefore, we have been attempting to keep courses in sequence so that they would run over more than one quarter. I think that, of course, you know, nobody can tell a faculty member how to teach, but I would suspect, let's say if I were teaching a 2 or 3 quarter course, I would postpone any long papers to the second or the third quarter. It would certainly make more sense that way, and I suspect that this is what will happen.
So you could require students to take, say, even a 3-quarter course.
Oh yes, there'll be many 3-quarter courses. I think there'll be more 2 and 3-quarter courses than single quarter courses.